Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on pellets and the effect pellet choice can have on accuracy. Now pellet choice is probably one of the most important factors when it comes to accuracy, and using the wrong pellet for your rifle will cause it to be inaccurate, or at the very least not as accurate as it could be. To show this, what I'm doing here is shooting two 5-shot groups at 30 yards using my Daystate Red Wolf GP. This was done indoors at Pete's Airgun Farm, with the first group being shot using some very old Bisley Magnums. This rifle did not like these pellets in the slightest, and as you can see from the group appearing on screen now, it's extremely inaccurate. The next group was done with no modifications or changes to the rifle. I just swapped the pellets over to Air Arms Express, which is probably this rifle's favourite pellet. As you can see, the difference is very noticeable, although I will say I did pick the very worst looking pellets I could find, and normally the difference between the two groups would not be as extreme, but I wanted to show you how bad things can really be. Right then, so back over at the bench you can see the two groups done side by side there. These ones on this side were done using the Bisley Magnums, these ones here were done using the Air Arms Express. If we take a set of calipers, we can just measure the groups very quickly, back to back. So that one looks to be about 26.5mm edge to edge, something like that. Then the Air Arms Express, a much more respectable sub 10mm group, so about 9, maybe 9.5, something like that, edge to edge, so much more accurate. To actually find the perfect pellet for your rifle, what you're going to need to do is do some pellet testing. Now pellet testing can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. Typically speaking, my routine when pellet testing a rifle would be to first clean the barrel, then put 50 or so good quality pellets through the barrel just to let it back up again. Once that's done, I would start testing different pellets. You don't need to shoot thousands of shots, just 10 to 20 to zero the rifle and get some lead up the barrel, then do 4 to 5 5-shot groups to test the accuracy. Once I'm finished with the first pellet, I move straight on to the second and continue testing. Typically speaking, what I do is 2 rounds of testing. The first round is just to eliminate the bad pellets and highlight some of the good ones. Then the second round of testing is more concentrated, just focusing on the ones that showed promise in the first round of tests. The only other thing I will mention is that I like to group pellets based on their brand. So typically speaking, I'll do all of the JSBs first, then move on to the QYS and then the H&Ns. You could, if you wanted to, clean the barrel between the different brands, just so you don't get no cross-contamination of lead. To be honest with you, I've really not found that too necessary to do, but if you wanted to, you could do that as well. With that said, different rifles will have a slightly different preferred pellet, and even 2 rifles of the same brand and model may not like the exact same pellets. Slight variations in the barrel, reg pressure, and how the valve opens and closes can determine which pellet the rifle will prefer, and there is no one pellet that will be perfect in every rifle. However, most good quality pellets will work well, and it ultimately all depends on how much testing you want to do. Another factor to keep in mind is the range that you're shooting at. At the closer ranges, so 20 to 30 yards, pellet choice will have much less of an impact on accuracy, but as you move out to the further distances, pellet choice will become much more critical. If we take a look at my testing, the QYS pellets, so the streamlined and the domed pellets, worked very well at 30 yards, so these are the 2 groups here, but as we moved out to 50 yards, the groups themselves opened up quite substantially. But on other pellets, such as the Air Arms Express, they were both very good at 30 yards. As you can see here, both of these groups were done using Air Arms Express. Then at 50 yards, the groups really didn't open out that much. The only other thing I want to mention before we move on is even batches of pellets from the same brand and model will behave very slightly differently. Batch and die testing is probably a little too much for plinking and practicing, but serious bench rest, HFT and FT shooters will test different batches of pellets to find the perfect ones for their rifles. You can see this effect quite clearly at the top here. These are just 4 different batches of shorts at the top, and at 30 yards they perform pretty much identically. It isn't until we move out to 50 yards which we see some are much worse than others. And just to mention, all these groups here were done at 30 yards, all these groups here were done at 50, again using my Red Wolf. The same can be said about pellet head size. So on my particular Red Wolf, it seemed to favour the 5.1 head size pellets. As you can see at 30 yards, the 5.1 expresses were slightly tighter grouping. Then as we move out to 50, the same can be said. So 50 yards express, 5.1, and then this one here was done using 5.2s. The batch, die and head size information can usually be found on the bottoms of the tins. So as you can see here, these 2 tins, 5.1 and 5.2 head size. This number here refers to the batch. Then on the JSBs, these 2 or 1 or 2 numbers at the front here reference the die. If this number here has 8 characters, the first 2 numbers reference the die, and if the number here only has 7 characters, the first 1 represents the die. With that all said and done, there are tons of pellets out there, some very good and others very bad. If you don't know where to start, I'm just going to list 4 of my recommended 177 pellets that I use in most of my rifles. First off, we have the JSB shorts. These have been my secret weapon for a little over 5 years now. For me, they work very well in about 70% of my rifles. They seem to work well in Loafer, Wolfer and CZ barrels, and whilst they're not perfect for all rifles, they will shoot pretty well in anything I can put them in. And for me at least, they've performed the standard 844 pellets from JSB. The only minor problem that I have with them is that in some magazines they do struggle to cycle. That does seem to be a problem with the shorter pellets, but this was a very rare issue. They used to be very hard to get a hold of in the UK, but I think you can get them through Anglia Gun and Tackle, as well as a couple other pellet suppliers. The only other thing I'll mention in regards to the shorts is that I've had much better luck with the tinned versions over the premium boxes. So the second pellet is the Air Arms Express, another all-round good pellet. I've always found that the Air Arms branded pellets seem to perform slightly better than the JSB equivalent, despite being made in the same factory. I did read that the Air Arms pellets were made from selected dies, but I don't know the whole story. I do know, however, that they work very well for me personally. Like the shorts, they seem to work well in everything that you put them in, and I've found that they work brilliantly in my Red Wolves with no major problems. Next up is the H&N 8s. These are pretty much the only H&N pellet I can consistently get on with. They are slightly cheaper than the JSBs, and they perform nearly as well. I have not found a rifle that prefers them over everything else, but they work pretty average in everything that I've tried them in. If you're just plinking or practicing and don't need to use the best pellets available, these are a very solid option. And the fourth and final 177 pellet is the JSB Heavies. So the Heavy is well loved by hunters and pest controllers. The 10.34 grain Heavy is pretty much the heaviest pellet that's viable for sub 12 use. JSB do make a 13.4 grain monster pellet, but that is a little too much for a sub 12 rifle. It works at the closer ranges, but is travelling far too slowly and drops very quickly past 20 yards. The 10.34 grain Heavy, however, is a good balance between weight and speed, and for me they have worked very well in FX liners, particularly the 4.51 head size ones. The other reason I like the Heavies is that they are very consistent over the chronograph, along with being very efficient. I use the Heavies when setting the power of my rifles, as the heavy pellets will usually be a little higher in power than the medium weight ones. For the 2.2 shooters out there, my two recommendations are the JSB Hades and the JSB Stratons. The Stratons are a pointed pellet and seem to work pretty well in everything that I've tried them in, and the same can be said about the Hades. Again, I really don't shoot 2.2 that much anymore, but I've always got a tin of Stratons and Hades in the box, just in case I need to test something out. With that all said and done, every single rifle on the market today is slightly different in some way, and they may like slightly different pellets. Some rifles will absolutely hate JSBs and only shoot H&N, others will be the total opposite. I get recommended QYS pellets very often, and at 30 yards they do work really quite well. However, I typically only really shoot at 50 yards, and at 50 yards the groups open out quite a bit. JSBs have always worked very well for me at both 30 and 50 yards, so they are my go-to. But when testing, I always keep an open mind and I go through each pellet individually. There is no one pellet that will work absolutely perfectly in every rifle, and pellet testing or experimentation is critical to get the most from your rifle. Even when doing things like changing reg pressure or replacing parts in the rifle, you could do another pellet test after you've made your changes, as slight differences or changes within the internals of a rifle can change what pellet the rifle prefers. And for me at least, pellet testing the rifle is part of the fun of owning one. With that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. If you have a pellet recommendation you want to share, leave it in the comments below. But for now, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video, so I'll see you in the next one.